Welcome to Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. My name is Paula Gloria, and today I have a very special topic. I have with me Shireen Chirazo, and Shireen has a show on WBAI called Live from Palestine. And we're also going to be hearing today from Webster Tarpley, who's an expert on world events. He's an historian, a scholar, and his particular specialty is 9/11 as the kingpin myth to be deconstructed if we are to have a prayer of a chance to get out of the turmoil in the Middle East. So Shireen, welcome to Farther Down the Rabbit Hole.
Thank you very much, Paula. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, it's always a joy to be with you. Can you give for our viewers who might be tuning in for the first time, just very briefly, your background, your association with Palestine, and then what's going on today? And then we'll be hearing from Webster giving us another briefing.
Okay, well, I've been following this, the Palestine, what I call the Palestine-Israeli conflict for 20 years now. I went to the Holy Land first on a spiritual journey in 1985, and really ended up getting caught up and embroiled in the political situation, seeing that what I had been told in the media in the United States, what I had grown up on, was not the truth at all. And I found the Palestinian people to be a very, very oppressed people, living in a land that now they were strangers in, and being treated as second-class, third-class, sixth-class citizens. And as I did further research, I realized that there were 9 million refugees in the Palestinian refugees in the world, many of them still living in squalid refugee camps. And
Did you see these camps?
Yes, I've been to about 9 or 10 camps in my life. And I've gone back several times. I spent time in the refugee camps around Gaza, in the West Bank, and in the summer of 2000 I spent a month doing humanitarian work in Shatila refugee camp in the suburb in Beirut.
And you actually work with people who are both Arabs and Jews, right?
Yes,
who realize that this problem is solvable.
Yes,
well,
I think it's...
I mean, maybe that's an ambitious term, but that it's not as complex, or it's not what the media tells us.
It's not what the media tells us, and it could be solved if it were left to human beings. It's not about being Jewish or Palestinian. It's really a human issue. But within that human issue, it is very important to understand that one side has been done a terrible injustice, and that justice has to be done to the Palestinian people, because they've been the ones that have really been the historical losers on this whole thing, and they're suffering immensely as we speak.
Historically, you mean the last 100 years?
In the last 100
years.
Because
I know biblically, I think the Israelis and the Palestinians have had a history of conflict.
Well, they actually haven't. That's what people think. They think that that's the
the Philistines. I just meant the Philistines in the Bible, but we'll let Rabbi Bob Ruff have another show on that one.
Yeah.
Because I'm saying to my audience that I would like Shireen to have her own show, because this topic is so enormous.
So deep.
But for now, we'll use the time. Is Webster on the line? Has Webster been called? Because we're expecting a call from Webster. And my shows are only 28 minutes now. I know. So there's a lot of material to go over.
What I just want to point out, though, very quickly, though, is that Palestinians and Jews living in the Holy Land really basically got along. I mean, at the turn of the century, Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs had no beef with each other. They got along fine. They were neighbors. Even Chaim Weizmann, who was the son of the president, the first president, wrote memoirs and talked about this, that this conflict is really a result of geopolitical events happening from the...
You know, I lived on the island of Cyprus for 4 years, and the same thing with Greeks and Turks. They said that in the villages they got along. But I must say, an intimate observation of the culture is there are dark places that we hold in our ethnic groups. And I think those geopolitical things that come along that maybe are enormously powerful, they would be completely impotent if they didn't have some little hook, that we had some corner of suspicion about the other.
Sure, and I think these ethnic feelings inside have been exacerbated by nationalism, which in my book is not a good thing. I would like to see a world of universal humanism. I would like to see no states, no countries, just everybody getting along. I think that would solve the problem. But that's why I got into this whole thing with such intensity, is because I found that such misinformation exists on the Palestinian people, who I have found to be an incredibly articulate, educated, caring and generous group of people who really get targeted the wrong way in the media. And that's not to say that the Jewish people aren't wonderful. I've also met many Jewish people of many stars and stripes who are very, very concerned with this issue. And they're not necessarily, you know, they're most of them are not Zionists.
Oh, I think we have Webster on the line,
Oh,
so let's see what he has. Webster, can you hear me? It's Paula Gloria farther down the rabbit hole. We're hoping that we're going to have Webster Tarpley, who is an historian, a scholar that's been following geopolitical events for practically all his educated life. Are you with us, Webster?
Here I am. Hello.
Great. Webster, have you been following our introduction? Shireen has a background in Palestine, and she's got a show on WBAI live from Palestine. Any comments?
Highly interesting. I would like to make some comments on the tremendous danger represented by this Israeli aggression into Lebanon, as well as by what they're doing to Gaza and the rest of the occupied territories.
Okay.
Let me just say, first of all, the current Israeli aggression into Lebanon was planned here in the United States during a visit of Netanyahu, a leading extreme right-winger, a neo-fascist, really, of the Likud party. He visited Beaver Creek, Colorado in mid-June, where he met with Rumsfeld and Cheney to plan what is now being done.
So this is so Webster, this is another Made in USA, like your title on your book?
I'm afraid so. Also, Prime Minister Olmert visited Washington in late May at the same time that Tony Blair was here. Now, the other interesting thing is that the Hamas prisoners group, a very influential group within Hamas, had evolved a position whereby they said they were ready to recognize Israel's right to exist, provided that Israel would recognize the right to exist of the Palestinian state and exchange ambassadors and have full diplomatic relations and grant real independence, not Bantustan status, to the Palestinians. Now, concerning the fighting in Lebanon, the claim is made that these two Israeli soldiers were captured on Israeli territory. According to my information, this is absolutely false. Those two Israelis were deep into Lebanese territory, and there had been a pattern of continuous Israeli violations of that border, including incessant violations of Lebanese airspace.
Excuse me, Webster. Shireen has intimate contact with people there. Is that true, Shireen?
You know, I really believe that was true. The way it was reported was that they found these guys that Hezbollah captured these soldiers on the quote-unquote border. But there are really no defined borders, and my question really was, I said that many times, I said I'd be willing to bet that these guys were captured within Lebanese sovereign territory, and that therefore, you know, this is just a pretext to get the whole thing going. That was my assumption from the beginning, and the people that I've had on the radio for the last few hours, because I was broadcasting all night from Beirut.
Shireen's been up all night, Webster.
They've said the same thing, and they've also said that this is not motivated by Hezbollah, that the Israeli aggression was part of a larger regional plan.
Okay, Webster, you're right on.
There is, of course, a border which is actually quite well traced, because it's got fences all along it. It's a blue line. And the Israelis have been sending in special forces teams to raid into Lebanon, which they've been doing. And these two Israelis were part of one of those death squads, in effect. In terms of the overflights, remember that a couple of weeks ago, Israeli jets pretended to attack the residence of President Assad of Syria. So they were constantly violating the Syrian airspace, Lebanese airspace, excuse me. So the idea that this is unprovoked is a fiction. It's thoroughly provoked.
It's not only provoked, Webster, you're saying that provocation was planned in the USA.
Planned at Beaver Creek, Colorado.
Beaver Creek, Colorado specifically.
At a meeting of the American Enterprise Institute, again, Rumsfeld, Cheney, Netanyahu, Sharansky, another Israeli extremist. The other interesting thing is, according to the German newspaper Junge Welt, the Mossad had death squads operating inside Lebanon now for the past 4 or 5 years. These were ordered by Meir Dagan, D-A-G-A-N, the head of the Mossad, and this included car bombs and assassinations. One of the people they killed was a guy called Jibril, the son of the head of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So this would be Jibril the Younger that they killed. The Lebanese wanted to protest this. They wanted to point out that the Israelis had groups of Druzes and some Palestinians they had recruited who were killing people inside Lebanon. And it was U.S. Ambassador Feltman who told them that they couldn't do it. However, this raises the possibility that the former Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri was actually assassinated by the Mossad and not by Syria. So this completely transforms the view of what has happened in Lebanon in the past 12 months or so, compared to what the U.S. and the British are claiming.
Well, Webster, that's astonishing information, and that flies so much in the face of what the media is saying. How do we transform the public to understand this is not a wild theory?
Well, I think it's not a wild theory. This is well documented that we should demand that the State Department stop preventing the Lebanese government from presenting this dossier. Ambassador Feltman told the Lebanese that this would be an unfriendly act if the U.S., if the Lebanese showed that the Israelis were carrying out political assassinations and terrorism.
You mean you mean, Webster, if I'm understanding you correctly, the Lebanese government is told that if they say what's going on, the truth, it's going to be considered an unfriendly act?
Yes, and it won't be the first time. We have to remember that everything we know about this crisis that comes from Israel is subject to the scrutiny of an Israeli military censor. And the Associated Press and the other U.S. news organizations have accepted the obscene idea that every report that comes out of Israel is going to be cleared by the Israeli army in advance. Now, I think the other thing we have to focus on is the Israelis are getting a very significant bloody nose in the midst of this. They are, of course, carrying out a bomb now, die later policy. They've bombed water plants, electrical plants, 50 bridges, all kinds of civilian neighborhoods. They've bombed the Lebanese army, basically a policy of carpet bombing the entire country. But in the middle of this, let's look at a couple of things. The Hezbollah apparently have broken the Israeli code in advance of the invasion so that they knew something about what was coming. One of the Israeli corvettes, a gunboat off the coast of Lebanon, has been destroyed by a missile. An F-16 of the Israelis has been shot down over Lebanon. At least 2 of the Israelis' newest Merkava tanks have been destroyed. On the northern front, the Israeli army headquarters for that region had all of its antennas and above-ground emplacements destroyed by missiles. This is in a place called Miron. And if you see the attempts of the Israelis to get into southern Lebanon, they are being driven back with losses. 2 killed yesterday. Today, a tank destroyed. And the number of Israeli dead today is under the cover of the Israeli military censor. So what we're seeing by Hezbollah is highly effective asymmetrical warfare, which means the death knell for the usual Israeli blitzkrieg model.
You mean, is that something like the redcoats here during the revolution?
Well, I think it's a stunning reverse for the Israelis. In particular, the destruction of this warship off the coast was a real shock for the Israelis. And the fact that a lot of their high-tech stuff is being matched and indeed overmatched by Hezbollah. Now, this gets us into the possible escalation. All of the reports we can see today are about preparations for a ground invasion of southern Lebanon. It looks like the Israelis would like at least to get up to the Litani River so they could begin stealing the water out of the Litani River.
Right,
but there
it's
are
a
other
water
plans
issue
on the table which are for something bigger. An airborne sneak attack on Syria, an invasion of Syria, the so-called right turn. Now I have to remind people, there's a Russian naval facility at the port of Tartus in Syria. There may well be a Russian surface-to-air missile battalion inside Syria. So if the Israelis start bombing Syria, there's a good chance that they will kill some Russians. This will have awesome implications for the world situation. If they go further and try to attack Iran, there may be Russian SAMs, surface-to-air missiles in Iran as well. There are also Russians for sure in the nuclear facilities that would be bombed. There are Chinese in the oil fields. You can see how any Israeli attack on Iran and or Syria gets us onto the slide into World War III.
Webster, is there any way that we can take this crisis as a wake-up call and kind of prevent the nuclear aggression against Iran? You sounds like it fumbled a little bit.
Well, the neocon elites, you can see every day in the newspapers how insane they are. We have Newt Gingrich raving about World War III. This man belongs in an insane asylum. The same thing goes for William Crystal at the Weekly Standard, for Michael Ledeen at the American Enterprise Institute. These are the neocon fascist madmen who are trying to drag this country into World War III. But
Webster, couldn't it also be something where the Israelis, having had losses that they didn't anticipate they would mistrust this kind of assistance that they're getting, which, I quote, assistance? Is it really helping them?
Well, I think certainly the current ruling class of Israel is leading that country into an absolute catastrophe, with the clear threat of annihilation of Israel if they continue with a policy of war.
But isn't it similar to what's going on with us? So many of us, we go out into the streets, we march, we say we don't want to have the war. Don't you think in Israel they want to wake up too and shed this bad leadership?
Well, there was a significant peace demonstration organized in Tel Aviv on Sunday by the Gush Shalom, right, of Yuri Avneri, the Israeli peace movement. And these, of course, are fine people. The problem you have in Israel, you have to imagine a country where all the politicians are neocons. All the politicians are people like Wolfowitz, Crystal, Pearl, Ledeen, Woolsey, Gingrich. They're all politically stupid. They're all unilateralists. They believe in military solutions. And they are leading that country on a cakewalk to hell.
And they're on
cakewalk to hell.
Right, I know. And they're on the dole from our military-industrial complex, right?
That is the other thing we have to bear in mind, that when the world looks at this, they know that it's all being financed by the U.S. $4 billion of U.S. military aid per year. And this is being used now by the Israelis in flagrant violation of U.S. law. The U.S. Arms Export Control Act says they're not allowed to use those weapons for aggression. And this is clearly aggression, what they're doing right now. So the Israelis are in violation of U.S. law. I think an appropriate penalty would be to take that $4 billion, take it away from the Israelis and give it to the Lebanese as development aid. And this would begin to reestablish some notion of morality in this. But I think the most immediate thing we need right now is a ceasefire. The hostilities have to end. Bush and Condoleezza Rice have shown again their colossal incompetence, their absolute strategic idiocy.
No, I
need a ceasefire right away.
Do you think this would be yet another aspect of misprision of treason if they knew that these weapons were being used in violation and not being used for defensive purposes?
Yes, I certainly think it is. I think we have a new ground.
So our list is growing.
The list is growing. The bill of impeachment is getting longer. The other thing we have to watch out for is false flag operations by the Israelis. You still have pockets of people with American passports, American citizens, in southern Lebanon who are now under the gun of the Israelis. First of all, the danger is they're simply going to be killed by Israeli bombing raids. But then we have the question of false flags, to which I've tried to call attention over the weekend in a release that is widely distributed on the internet. The idea here is you get a bunch of Americans together, they are the subject of an atrocity, they get killed, and the Israelis come in and blame it on Hezbollah. It may have been the Israelis who did the killing, it may have been the allies of the Israelis among the various militias, it may be Meir Dagan's death squad with all kinds of people who look like Arabs, even though they're actually working for the Israelis. You get a bunch of Americans killed in Lebanon right now. It's blamed on Hezbollah. You've got a one-way ticket to World War III. So we have to inoculate the U.S. population. Any Americans get killed in Lebanon, the responsibility goes to the Israelis and to Condoleezza Rice at the State Department, because they obviously have the slowest of all the countries of the world in terms of getting people out, despite the tremendous resources of the U.S. military machine. Everybody else in the world got their citizens out quicker than the U.S. had managed to do.
I see.
This is an absolute mess.
So it sounds like every day it's going to be interesting.
The problem the Israelis face is that their military methods are not working. I think there must be shock and consternation. The clique that's running Israel today is the Halutz Eisenkot clique. Halutz is the head of the Israeli General Staff. Olmert and Peretz are essentially, I think, straw men for this guy. Netanyahu is important because he has the backing of Cheney most directly. But Halutz has been promising the destruction of Hezbollah from the air, and this is simply, it's an illusion, it's a fantasy, it's not happening. Rather, what we've seen is that the Israelis have been defeated in a series of high-tech areas, which I'm sure must have shocked them enormously, and I think they're wondering what to do. If they choose a flight forward into Syria, the world is headed for World War III, and that is why this contemptible little puppet we have in the White House and this incompetent liar at the State Department.
Now, Webster, labels.
We're talking about high crimes against humanity under the Nuremberg Code. We're talking about international conspiracy to wage aggressive war. There's got to be a ceasefire immediately. The U.S. has got to repudiate this aggressive policy by the Israelis, and the answer really ought to be the convening of a Middle East peace conference to put all of these questions on the table. The Palestinian state, the status of Lebanon, the exit of the U.S. forces from Iraq, the whole business with Iran. If the Israelis feel so threatened by Iran, let them come to the negotiating table. I'm sure the Iranians will say that they feel threatened too by Israel's 400 nuclear weapons, or 500, and get a negotiated solution. But no unilateralism, and there is no military solution to the things that the Israelis say they want. They will not get anywhere near what they want.
Well, Webster, I really want to thank you for highlighting that negotiating table aspect.
Yeah, obviously the Middle East ought to be the crossroads of a peaceful world. It ought to be the junction of rail, air, and ocean traffic between Europe and Asia and Africa, which is pretty much the Eastern Mediterranean, is where these things come together. It ought to be a prosperous area of ports, warehouses, rail junctions. It ought to be a place that has plenty of water through desalinization plants, rather than fighting a war to get to the Litani River.
Oh, I like that.
Steal the water out of it.
Desalinization technology.
Desalinization,
excellent. Well, Shireen says that's possible.
Yeah, I think that definitely is. It is possible as long as the Israelis will stop their aggression in trying to divert the water sources and everything else. I mean, but I wanted to basically agree with you and back up what you said, Webster, that the Americans are really not doing anything to help the situation. I've been on the line with people who are literally fleeing for their lives from Tyre, heading up to Beirut, and they're trying to actually get to the port. My one friend, who's actually an American citizen, is there with his 4 children. He, I guess, would be considered American, even though he's Palestinian. And they were trying to make the call this morning as to whether they would try to get to the ship on their own or try to get to the American embassy. He said if he got to the ship, there was no guarantee that the ship was going to be there because no information was available. And basically the Israelis were hitting every civilian target that they could get their hands on, and that Hezbollah could be nowhere found in the south. So that if any Americans get killed, it is definitely from Israeli fire and missiles and everything else. But I wanted to ask you very quickly, what are the wider implications of this? In other words, what is the U.S.'s agenda and goal and what is the Israelis' agenda in putting forth the conditions for a possible World War III? Are they trying to bring about Armageddon?
I would say that again, these are neocons of a political stupidity which is exquisite in its own way. It's sort of a museum piece. The Israelis say, we bomb Lebanon, this will convince the Lebanese people to turn against Hezbollah. This is obviously it's just a lunatic logic. If you bomb Lebanon, the Lebanese people are smart enough to turn against the people who are doing the bombing. Generally speaking, the Cheney clique and its friend Netanyahu have been trying, along with Tony Blair on the British side, have been trying to arrange some kind of a flight forward out of the fact that they have lost the Iraq war. This is quite evident, and they have been targeting Iran and Syria. You can hear this constant litany in every statement that the Israelis make, every time Bush opens his mouth, every time Condoleezza says something, it's always Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran. And that's the target list. They had hoped to accomplish this with some kind of large-scale weapons of mass destruction, false flag terrorism. One of the focal points of that has been European soccer champions. They failed. They're trying to do it this way.
Webster, we're out of time. At one last comment that you would want someone in Palestine to respond to, because we're going to try to get a dialogue. Let's go out with your request to them.
Well, my request is, my proposal is, it's important to agitate for a peace conference. Put up the demand for a peace conference for the Middle East in general.
Okay.
Demand that the U.S. and the British stop sabotaging.
Okay, so stay.
Enjoy broad support.
Great. Stay tuned next week to see how Palestine and the Israelis are going to respond to what Webster says. They're going to hear it over the internet, and we're going to hear back from them. And we'll hear from you again, Webster. Thanks for calling.
Thanks very much, Paula.
Thank you, Webster.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. This is...
The one other thing that has to be done is the following. In the past 5 years, the basis and the justification for every crime, every atrocity committed against the Arabs and the Muslims in this world, and in particular in the Middle East, from Sharon's destruction of the PLO infrastructure in the spring of 2002 to the atrocities that are now going on in Lebanon, the basis for all of this and the way that this has been sold to public opinion is based on the 9/11 myth, the racist, warmongering myth spread by the Bush administration, the FBI, and others that somehow it was a group of 19 Arabs who brought down the World Trade Center, attacked the Pentagon, and hijacked these airplanes on September 11th. This amounts to one of the biggest blood libels in human history, and this applies to all of the Arab states. It applies to Syria, it applies to Hamas, it applies to Hezbollah. This will be the basis of the war against Iran, which is now clearly on the horizon. It is therefore imperative that the PLO, that the Palestinian government, Hamas, Hezbollah, all of them, if they want to profoundly change the power relations in the international debate, they have got to take the lead in taking down this myth. They have got to contribute something to refuting and defeating this tremendous blood libel that has been launched against them. Now, there are signs that the Venezuelan government of President Hugo Chavez is interested in hosting an independent international truth commission on the model of the Bertrand Russell Vietnam Tribunal of 1966-1967. Mahathir Mohamad, a very distinguished Muslim leader from Malaysia, has expressed his interest in the project. What has to happen is a greater support for this idea, greater interest coming from the Arab world, from Syria and Iran above all, since they are now the next on the hit list, but any person of goodwill anywhere in the world, but a special stress on the Arabs would be necessary. So it's time to use 9/11 truth to stop the wars in the Middle East.